The 2025 NFL Draft is officially in the books, so here's my take on what every team did. Starting with the team that had the #1 overall pick and the easiest decision of the night, the Tennessee Titans showed the world why you can't spell quarterback without Ward, selecting Miami's Cam Ward as their new franchise guy. An obvious and necessary pick because trotting out Levis for another season was not an option. When it comes to him, where there's a will, there's a way to lose a game. So Tennessee's getting a fresh start with Ward, who's already aura farming to the highest degree by being allowed to wear #1 after Warren Moon willingly unretired it and bestowed it upon him. No pressure, Cam. The Titans followed up the Ward pick by snagging some defensive pieces to help them not give up the third most points in the league again, and rounded out their draft by adding some weapons that will both help Cam Ward and make everyone forget about Treylon Burks once and for all. Remember when they chose him over AJ Brown? Good times. The Cleveland Browns found themselves staring down the barrel of the best overall player in the draft and said, you know what? He's way too good for us. And honestly, I'm not gonna argue with them. Instead, they traded the second overall pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who selected Football Ohtani, officially bringing Travis Hunter to Duval. Now, Jacksonville gave up a pretty good haul to move up and get him, but I still think it was a good move. Not just because Travis Hunter's really good, but because it serves as a statement by this new regime that they're not messing around. They'll make big moves if they think it's worth it. And that should scare the rest of the league, since Jacksonville's new GM was one of the minds involved in the them pick strategy in LA that won them a Super Bowl. Aside from Hunter, the Jags also made one of my favorite picks in the draft, picking up running back Bashal Tutin, who I will be drafting way too much of in fantasy football. An explosive running back taken in the middle rounds with uninspiring competition at his position, coached by Liam Cohen? Yeah, sounds familiar. Toot toot, baby. The New York Giants took the best player available approach, selecting Abdul Carter with the #3 pick. Clearly not a positional need because the Giants' pass rush was one of their only actual strengths last season, but it's hard to blame anyone for taking a guy that has 15+ sack potential. Also, his full name is Abdul Jabbar Carter, like Kareem, so that's pretty cool. After taking Carter, New York traded back into the first round to take quarterback Jackson Dart. I'm not exactly sure if drafting another goofy white dude after they just got rid of their old one is gonna work out, but then again, the last time they got a goofy white dude specifically out of Ole Miss, it worked out pretty well for him. Overall, I thought it was a decent draft for New York, but I'm also pretty sure it's the last one this regime is ever gonna make. They're already on the hot seat, and as much as I like Cam Skattebo, I don't think he or anyone else in this class is capable of cooling it down. As a Patriots fan, I wish I could be completely unbiased here, but let's be honest, that's probably not possible. Either way, oh my god, I love this draft. They started out by getting some protection for Drake May in the form of Will Campbell, who immediately said he would fight and die for his quarterback. And before you say, oh, he's got short arms, he dominated the SEC. I don't care how short his arms are. Remember, it's not the size of your appendages that matter. It's what you do with them. Girth has always been more important than length anyway. After Campbell, they drafted a running back who's great at pass protecting and not fumbling the football, a great addition for a team that was terrible at pass protecting and holding onto the football. They also added one of the most underrated receivers in the draft, one of the most underrated edge rushers in the draft, a new kicker, and even a new long snapper for good measure. This draft felt so effective and so different from how New England would normally approach it that I have no choice but to assume the entire thing was conducted with Mike Vrabel holding Elliott Wolf at gunpoint. There was a time where a lot of mock drafts had the Cleveland Browns projected to make Shedeur Sanders the second quarterback drafted. And technically they weren't wrong. He was just the second quarterback drafted to his own team. The Browns actually had a pretty solid draft, taking Mason Graham 5th overall, adding Carson Schlesinger in the second round, and getting their new lead back with the second rounder they got from the Jags. But it wouldn't be the Browns without some element of weirdness thrown in. Picking Dillon Gabriel over Shedeur Sanders already raised some eyebrows, but picking Shedeur 2 rounds later and adding him to a quarterback room with Dillon Gabriel definitely raised the rest of the eyebrows that had previously been unraised. I guess when your veteran quarterbacks are 80-year-old Joe Flacco and Kenny Pickett of all people, taking multiple bites at the quarterback apple isn't a terrible idea, but I can't help but feel like this is going to be more trouble than it's worth. Then again, when it comes to Browns quarterbacks, they're pretty used to that. Apparently the Raiders just have dibs on the most fun player in every draft. Last year they got Brock Bowers, who was the only bright spot on an otherwise horrible team that pretended alternating between Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell was an acceptable way to operate as an NFL franchise, and he became arguably the best tight end in the sport, even with those goons throwing to him. Then this year they drafted Ashton Jeanty, giving the offense yet another fancy new toy to work with. It feels like the Raiders are really adopting the identity of the city of Las Vegas. It doesn't matter if you actually win anything or even have regrets when it's all said and done. All that matters is you had fun with all the bright and shiny attractions while you were there. And Ashton Jeanty is the brightest and shiniest of them all. The Jets got a new offensive lineman in Armand Membu, which is good because it will give Justin Fields as much time as possible to decide whether he wants to throw to his first read or take off running. Jokes about Fields not being able to go through his progressions aside, that approach might actually be the optimal way for the Jets to operate in 2025. Because assuming Garrett Wilson is the first read 99% of the time, the options beyond him are not great. But that could open the door for 2 of the Jets' other draft picks to make a name for themselves. Mason Taylor out of LSU and Arian Smith out of Georgia have very little competition ahead of them, so they could be thrust into big roles pretty quickly. Then again, since they're rookies, their Madden ratings probably won't be very high, so Woody Johnson might kick them off the team altogether before the season even starts. The Panthers could have gone a number of different directions with their first round pick, but they decided getting another tall receiver Bryce Young can actually see when he gets down the field was their best bet. And I think that's fair. Xavier Legette wasn't a bad X receiver. I mean, his name is literally X, but there's a difference between the caliber of prospect that goes 32nd overall versus one that goes 8th. So the Panthers will be hoping Tet McMillan can be more of that true alpha wide receiver one, while X moves over to Z. Also, not for nothing, but the Panthers definitely won the name draft. The full first names of their first 3 picks are Tetaroa, Nick Tedrick, and Princely. That can't be a coincidence. I mean, the combined aura of those 3 names is so strong, it makes me think it had to be a part of Carolina's scouting strategy. Their checklist is just how athletic are you, what's your work ethic like, and do you have a dope name? Come to think of it, this team already has dudes dudes named Chuba Hubbard, Jalen Coker, and Tommy Tremble. Yeah, they're definitely scouting names. The Saints are going to be hot ass this year. Let's just get that out of the way. Their roster has more holes than a Swiss cheese dartboard, which is why I think it was absolutely the correct decision to address the offensive line in the first round and call it a day. Mocking Shedeur Sanders to the Saints became a popular trend leading up to the draft, and my thoughts on that then were the same as they are now. What in the hell was Shedeur Sanders or any other first-round quarterback going to do with this dookie roster? No, this is a multi-year rebuild. It needs to be treated as such. And Kelvin Banks Jr. is a good start. With that said, while spending a first-rounder on a quarterback would have been a poor use of resources, I can justify spending a second, just to get a warm body out there who isn't Spencer Rattler. And maybe Tyler Shuck will be decent. Who knows? Point is, it's an acceptable investment to make after you use your first-round capital on a more foundational piece. Because God knows that foundation needs some help. Good luck, Kellen. You're gonna need it. It's a new era for the Chicago Bears, and they're flexing their Johnson to anyone that will look at it. I mean him. This was the first draft for the BJ regime, and Chicago's new head coach definitely put his stamp on it. Because he used his first 2 picks on guys who, based on the Bears' current roster, they didn't really need, which tells me that Ben is trying to make it very clear that he's going to do things his way and build the team he wants. He's not just going to settle for the weapons they have if he sees guys available that he thinks he can use, which is exactly why he pulled the trigger on Colston Loveland and Luther Burden. The only real surprising part of the Bears draft to me is that they didn't use a higher pick on a running back. But hey, it's not like drafting a 7th round running back from Rutgers hasn't worked out before. When you have a coach like Kyle Shanahan, an offensive genius who loves adding new toys to his toy box, you pretty much know what your drafts are going to look like. That's right, 5 straight defensive players to start the draft. Wait, what? Okay, maybe it's not that surprising since the Niners defense got rated in free agency like a Discord mod rating target for the latest Pokemon restock. But you just know Shanahan was off to the side watching every pick and grumbling like, running backs are cooler. Still though, after making those 5 defensive picks headlined by Mykel Williams out of Georgia, Shanny did get some skill guys, including Jordan Watkins out of Ole Miss and Jordan James out of Oregon. And those picks prove more than ever before that Kyle's a sneakerhead, because even at the NFL draft, the only thing he's focused on is picking up a new pair of Jordans. If anyone out there watching this is an offensive lineman named Tyler, you better start shopping for houses in Dallas, because there's about a 75% chance the Cowboys are going to draft you. No, seriously, over the last 4 drafts, the Cowboys have taken an offensive lineman named Tyler with their first round pick 3 times. And the one time they didn't, they probably wish they did. But as weird as it is that they keep taking guys with the same name, I kinda admire their relentless dedication to building up the trenches. For a team that has a reputation of really liking attention and wanting people to talk about them, they're one of the least sexy drafters year in and year out. Almost to a fault, because I really expected a team that went into the draft with only Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders in their backfield to target a running back before the 5th round. Instead, they opted to double up at the position on day 3 with Jaden Blue out of Texas and Phil Maffa out of Clemson, at least one of whom I expect to get significant work in this backfield at some point, because Miles Sanders is withering away like a houseplant in a windowless room, and Javonte Williams couldn't generate an explosive play if you put a stick of dynamite in his jockstrap. I made a joke in another video about how badly the Dolphins needed a corner in this draft because as it stood, they were set to start Storm Duck unironically, and then Miami just didn't draft a corner until the 5th round. Now, I would ask if their front office was on drugs during this draft, but I already know the answer to that, because clearly they're all smoking quack. Sorry, that was bad. Almost as bad as the Dolphins secondary is going to be this year. No disrespect to Kenneth Grant, he is a mountain of a man and will definitely help Miami's defense up the middle. I just don't know if this is going to be the type of pick that moves the needle and pulls the Dolphins out of football limbo, a place they've been stuck in for pretty much the entirety of the Mike McDaniel era. Their draft wasn't terrible though. I like the Jonas Savaiinaia pick to help bolster their offensive line. Ollie Gordon could be a fun Thunder complement to Devon Achan's Lightning, and Quinn Ewers might already be the best quarterback in the Dolphins roster. Everyone was mocking a tight end to the Colts in the 1st round, but we know how the NFL draft works. Outside of the first few picks, it's never that easy. It never goes according to plan, so, oh hey, they took a tight end. Yeah, the reason this pick was so obvious is because Indy's depth chart at the position had no depth. It was more like a kiddie pool chart, and the only one in it was Mo Alley Cox, and he was drowning somehow. So in steps Tyler Warren, who will add some much needed juice to the position. The only problem is his catch radius might need to be 53 yards wide if he's going to reel in any passes from either of the quarterbacks here. Luckily, Warren already has some experience taking direct snaps, because by week 3, the Colts might realize that's their best option. Heading into last year's draft, we thought the Falcons were going to address their absolutely disgusting, vomit-inducing pass rush. Instead, they took a quarterback, which in hindsight wasn't a terrible pick because Kirk turned out to be dust, but it left them with the most predictably bad pass rush in the entire league. All year, quarterbacks had enough time to read the entirety of War and Peace in the pocket before throwing a pass. But better late than never, I guess, because this year the Falcons drafted Jalen Walker with the 15th overall pick, and then traded back into the 1st to take James Pierce Jr. with the 26th overall pick. Atlanta's finally taking steps to address their biggest issue. Now, I don't know if adding these guys will give the Falcons defense enough firepower to ruin a quarterback's day, but they should at least be able to make them a little uncomfortable now. They can be the defensive equivalent of having wet socks, or a pimple on the inside of your nose. I feel like no one outside of Arizona cares about the Cardinals. Like, the public kinda cared when they drafted Marv because they wanted to see what the shiny new receiver was going to look like, and then once it became clear that his rookie season was just going to be fine instead of anything spectacular, people just tuned out. Honestly, it's probably just a result of them being a West Coast team that isn't the 49ers or Rams. But don't worry, Cardinals fans, if you exist, because I'm paying attention. And I think from a pure talent perspective, you might have won the first 2 rounds of the draft. Walter Nolan is one of the highest upside prospects in this entire class, and joins a revamped D-line that already added Josh Sweat, Calais Campbell, and Dalvin Tomlinson this offseason, and Will Johnson seemed like a surefire first rounder until injury concerns dropped him to the 2nd. But if those turn out to be a non-issue, that's an insane value for Arizona. The Cardinals already doubled their win total from 2023 to 2024. And while I don't think they'll do that again because that would mean they're going 16-1, another respectable jump could absolutely be in the cards. Get it? because it's short for Cardinals. You get it. Now that every dollar in the city of Cincinnati is tied up by the Bengals offense, they really have no choice but to build up their defense through the draft. And that's what they're trying to do after selecting edge rusher Shamar Stewart in the first round and linebacker Demetrius Knight Jr. in the second. Now, will that be enough to prevent the otherwise ready to contend for a Super Bowl Cincinnati Bengals from once again having a bottom 10 defense in the league? I don't know, especially if they keep beefing with their only defensive players worth a damn. But at least they're doing something demonstrating a desire to develop a diabolically depleted defensive depth chart. Time will tell if committing so much money to the offense and putting the defense in a spot where it can only be fortified through the draft was worth it. I think it was worth it just so we don't have to see photoshops of T. Higgins and other teams' jerseys anymore. But that's just me. Right or wrong, Sam Darnold has the reputation that he just absolutely diarrheas in his pants when he's under pressure. So when he signed with the Seahawks, who have one of the worst offensive lines in the entire league, it seemed like just about the worst fit you could think of. And it still might be, but Seattle's at least taking steps to make it slightly less awful. They took North Dakota State's Gray Zabel in the first round to help make their interior offensive line a little less turnstile-y before adding a couple tackles on day 3. Beyond just the offensive line though, the Seahawks had a pretty nice draft top to bottom, mostly because they picked up some freak athletes. They got safety Nick Eamon-Wari in the early second, who a lot of people thought would go in the first, a mismatched nightmare in tight end Elijah Arroyo, and then if the Darnold experiment does go to they could turn things over to Jalen Milroe, who if nothing else will at least be fun to watch. Emeka Egbuka was talked about as the most ready-to-play, immediate contributor wide receiver in the draft. So it's kind of funny that he went to one of the only teams with 2 genuinely elite wide receivers. I know Evans and Godwin aren't getting any younger, and I know it's never a bad thing to have an elite wide receiver 3. It's just not an ideal immediate fit for us fantasy nerds out there. Oh well, after Egbuka, it was pretty much all defense, including 2 corners to help beef up one of the league's worst secondaries, and that defensive focus makes sense, because outside of an occasional addition like Egbuka, there's really no reason to use any assets on the offensive side of the ball when you already have everything you could ever ask for. Of course, I'm referring to the one-man show, the greatest running back of all time, our Lord and Savior, Bucky Irving. In Bucky, we sucky. I mean, trust. The Denver defense was already going to be a problem, but the league just made it even more of a problem by allowing the Broncos to put arguably the best pure cornerback in the entire class in the same secondary as reigning Defensive Player of the Year, Patrick Surtain. Jahdae Barron will be joining a defense that was already 3rd in the NFL in points allowed last season, and just added Talanoa Hufanga and Dre Greenlaw. So Jahdae isn't the only thing the Broncos are expecting to be Barron. They're hoping opposing teams' point totals will be too. Speaking of Barron things, because I'm going to get as much mileage out of this wordplay as I can, the Broncos running back room before the draft was a sad place. So to fix that, they took RJ Harvey out of UCF in the 2nd round, causing fantasy football players to immediately start drooling like St. Bernards. It can be hard to project the usage of running backs taken outside of the 1st round, but when a guy is stepping into a depth chart filled with no one in particular on what should be a pretty good offense and is taking pictures with the coach's daughter, yeah, dude's going for 2,000 yards. I don't care. Ah yes, pick 21. The definition of no man's land if you're an NFL team looking for its next quarterback, as the Pittsburgh Steelers have been basically since Big Ben retired. And since it's no man's land and Pittsburgh didn't think there were any quarterbacks worth selecting here, they didn't take one. They opted for defensive tackle Derek Harmon instead. A big boy who fits the Steelers' identity and should be a nice boost to their defense, which is good, because their defense is going to be on the field an awful lot if they don't find a quarterback. Now I know, they took Will Howard in the 6th round, and he's a bit of a fan favorite, cult following type of guy after winning a national championship with Ohio State this past season, and maybe he will be that guy. All I'm saying is the best quarterback taken in the 6th round over the past decade is Gardner Minshew, and the next best one after him is Brandon Allen? Probably. So the odds aren't exactly in his favor. The Steelers also drafted running back Caleb Johnson in the 2nd round, who I would be more excited for if he didn't have Arthur Smith as his offensive coordinator, because that means he's going to be used in the most inconsistent and frustrating ways possible. Get ready to learn 35% snap share while Kenneth Gainwell gets goal line carries for some reason, buddy. Last year, the Chargers went into the draft really needing a pass catcher, and instead of drafting one in the 1st round, they made a very Jim Harbaugh pick by taking offensive tackle Joe Alt. Not a bad pick, obviously, just very on brand. This year, the Chargers once again went into the draft really needing a pass catcher, and instead of drafting one in the 1st round, they made a very Jim Harbaugh pick by taking bruising running back Omarion Hampton. I'm noticing a theme here. I can't say I'm surprised, because even though the Chargers squeezed as much juice as possible out of the presumably washed J.K. Dobbins last season, it still wasn't quite the level of run game you'd expect from a Harbaugh offense. And it probably would have been a similar story if they completely handed the keys over to Najee Harris. So they took their running back of the future, and for the 2nd year in a row waited until the 2nd round to address the receiver room. But if Trey Harris works out even half as well as Ladd McConkey did, and Justin Herbert can throw the ball to his own team rather than the opposing one, the Chargers could find themselves making a deep playoff run for the first time basically ever. If you told the Packers they had to draft a wide receiver in the 1st round or draw 25, they would have accumulated 550 cards since 2002. But their long Uno nightmare has finally come to an end after Green Bay drafted Texas wide receiver Matthew Golden in the 1st round, in hopes that he can finally add some above averageness to their painfully average receiver room. Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, and even Christian Watson, when his hamstrings don't resemble a bag of Mexican shredded cheese, all have their roles in this offense, but none of them have emerged as a truly reliable week-to-week option for Jordan Love. Golden has a chance to change that, even if he is wearing the most disgusting wide receiver number I've ever seen. I'm sorry, but numbers in the 20s should be for running backs, cornerbacks, and no one else. I don't make the rules. Honestly though, I'm just happy the Packers are focusing on their own offense for once, instead of crying about someone else's. The reason I didn't do actual grades for this video is because for the most part, I think every team did pretty well. So it would have just been a bunch of A's and B's, and that's just boring. But if there was any team I would have given an F to, it would have been the Minnesota Vikings. First of all, they only made 5 picks in the entire draft, including just 1 in the first 100. So if we were handing out participation trophies, they would have barely gotten one. And then to make it worse, out of the 5 picks they did make, not a single one addressed their biggest need, which is their putrid secondary. It was one of the worst in the league last season, and instead of adding some new talent at the position, Minnesota said, you know what a team with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison should spend their 3rd round pick on? Another receiver. I can justify their 1st round pick of Donovan Jackson a little bit, because they probably want to solidify the offensive line as much as possible before tasking it with protecting basically a rookie in JJ McCarthy, who's also coming off a torn meniscus. But no DBs anywhere? Really? Whatever. If you want your defense to spend all season getting burned like David Njoku at a bonfire, then I can't stop you. On this episode of teams that usually have a good defense but didn't really last year, we have the Baltimore Ravens. Maybe it's because their jerseys are dark and menacing, or maybe it's because I still have images of Ray Lewis, Terrell Suggs, and Ed Reed haunting me in my nightmares, but it feels like Baltimore's defense should always be good. And it's just weird when it's not. That's not to say it was bad necessarily, but they did give up the 2nd most passing yards in the league and gave up 27 points to the Bills in the divisional round, ultimately causing their playoff demise. So they're trying to fix it. Malachi Starks at pick 27 seems like just what the doctor ordered, and the 2024 FBS sacks leader Mike Green should help do the trick too. After those two, the Ravens made a lot of picks, but maybe the most notable was their selection of Tyler Loop, kicker out of Arizona, because that spelled the end for Deshaun Watson's protege, Justin, I don't know how that white stuff got there, Tucker. Rest in piss, bozo. The Lions lost their Johnson, and yes, they're self-conscious about it, don't bring it up. This was the first draft after a pretty large brain drain for Detroit, but it seems like it was pretty much business as usual. They got some very Dan Campbell-esque linemen in the 1st and 2nd round on both sides of the ball. Tyleik Williams is a tank, and I mean, just look at Tate Ratledge. That is a football guy if I've ever seen one. If there was one sort of surprising pick, it was probably Isaac TeSlaa in the 3rd round, who Brad Holmes gave up 2 2026 3rd round picks to get. But when it comes to drafting skill guys in the middle rounds, we are talking about the guy that hit on Sam Laporta and Amon-Ra St. Brown, so I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Plus, Isaac's last name is Tesla, so he's probably going to be pretty electric. The Commanders had to be a little shell-shocked picking this late for the first time in forever. No one expected an NFC Championship game appearance in Jaden Daniels' rookie year to push them all the way to the 29th pick. But that's exactly why they're making sure that the guy responsible for them picking this late is going to be protected. After trading for Laramie Tunsil a few weeks prior, Washington doubled down on their offensive line by taking Oregon offensive tackle Josh Connerly Jr. before getting another immediate contributor on the other side of the ball in cornerback Trey Amos. But one position where they did not get an immediate contributor, or any type of contributor, was arguably their biggest position of need. The Commanders are like one big marble, because they don't have any edges. At one point in the offseason, I thought maybe they would trade for Trey Hendrickson, but once they gave up 2 2026 draft picks for Laramie Tunsil, I figured that probably wouldn't happen, and they would just address it in the draft. And then they didn't do that either. Don't get me wrong, the Commanders are still going to be really good this year. They just need to figure out how to edge. Start edging, Washington! We all want to see you edge! The Buffalo Bills took a page out of the 49ers playbook in this draft because they too started with 5 straight defensive selections. And I think that's a testament to Josh Allen more than anything, because they trust him so much to be able to generate a top-tier NFL offense no matter what random weapons he has at his disposal, that it makes them comfortable spending all their draft picks on the other side of the ball. And that's probably fair. He did just have arguably his best season yet after losing Stephon Diggs. So defense it is. Headlined by cornerback Maxwell Hairston, who will help fortify the secondary and the vibes. I mean, this dude was the highlight of the 1st round. Dapping up every player that walked by, looking genuinely happy for everybody. Just seems like a great dude to have around, both on and off the field. And look, at the end of the day, I was always going to give the Bills a sparkling review for this draft class, because they were the only team to draft a player from the greatest university on the planet, the University of Connecticut, taking Chase Lunt in the 6th round. Go Huskies, baby. What is it about the Philadelphia Eagles that makes other teams let great players fall to them every year? Is Philly sweet-talking them? Are they hypnotizing them? Are they outright bribing them? I gotta know, because they can't keep getting away with it. Allowing the Eagles to get Jahad Campbell at pick 31 should be illegal, especially after they got Quinyon Mitchell last year and Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter the year before. It's getting to a point where, as much as I want to give Howie Roseman credit for constantly making great picks, I also want to do a wellness check on every other GM to make sure they're actually alive. Because for a lot of them, it doesn't seem like they're even trying. Would anyone out there care to prevent the defending Super Bowl champions from getting one of the most versatile defensive players in the draft with the 2nd to last pick of the 1st round? No? Okay. Would anyone like to prevent them from doing it again in the 2nd round? No? Okay, cool. I'll just go f myself. Much like the Eagles, the Chiefs also got a better prospect than any team who was just in the Super Bowl reasonably deserves, getting offensive tackle Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. The Chiefs themselves admitted Simmons was a dream target, but they thought there was no chance he'd still be available this late in the 1st round. Great job, rest of the league. You just let Kansas City fill one of the only holes they had on their roster. Now Patrick Mahomes is going to have time to throw, and he's going to have a healthy Rashee Rice and a year 2 Xavier Worthy. It's bad. It's all bad. Especially with Steve Spagnuolo adding 2 new pieces to the D-line while he draws up more of the most psychotic blitz packages mankind has ever seen. The Chiefs are going to make another Super Bowl, aren't they? God, I hate it here. Shout out to Baby Bash and T-Pain, because the Texans were moving their bodies like cyclones in this draft. If you know, you know. Houston restocked their receiver room by taking 2 Iowa State prospects who will come in and replace the departing Stephon Diggs and quite possibly the NFL's unluckiest player, Tank Dell. But even though I like Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, I do have some questions about Houston's approach in this draft. Because after having some of the biggest offensive line problems in the league last season and then giving themselves a tonsillectomy by sending Laramie to the Commanders, they traded out of the first round entirely without addressing the position. Now, they did take Ariante Ursary out of Minnesota in the second round, but for a line that gave them so much trouble last year and then traded away its best individual linemen, it's a little weird they're only addressing that problem with a second round pick, rather than just staying where they were and taking Josh Connerly Jr. or Josh Simmons. So while I want to be excited to see CJ Stroud throw the ball to his new Cyclone pals, I'm just not sure he's going to have enough time to do it before the D-line has him choking on turf beads. I think the Rams think that having first round picks is just too easy. Last year they made their first round pick since 2016, and he ended up being the defensive rookie of the year. And because of that, I think they may have decided that actually making their first round picks is too much of an advantage, so they traded out. They'd rather make picks on day 2 and day 3, and it clearly works for them since they found studs like Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, Kobe Turner, and others just in the last couple years. So if history is any indication, Terrence Ferguson is probably going to be pretty good. He's Oregon's all-time leader among tight ends in receptions and touchdowns, and joins a tight end room led by 32-year-old Tyler Higbee, who shouldn't be that hard to overtake at this stage of his career. If we're being honest, knowing the Rams, Ferguson will probably be the best tight end in the league this year. And their 3rd round pick, Josiah Stewart, will win Defensive Rookie of the Year, and 4th round pick, Jarquez Hunter, will win Offensive Rookie of the Year, or come in second to Ferguson. That's just how good the Rams are at drafting. Honestly, it's getting a little obnoxious at this point.